If you were gonna tell everybody I'm a hooker, why didn't you just let me wear my own clothes, okay? I mean, in my own clothes, when someone like that guy Stucky comes up to me, I can handle it. I'm prepared.
If there's one romantic comedy that defined a generation, it's Pretty Woman. For decades, audiences have fallen in love with the fairy tale of a businessman and a woman who meet under unusual circumstances. The film became a cultural phenomenon and turned Julia Roberts into a superstar. But recently, revelations have surfaced about what really went on behind the scenes and what the original version of this movie was supposed to be. The truth is darker than anyone expected. So what was Pretty Woman hiding? And what were the forbidden scenes that almost made it into the final cut?
Do you have anything in this shop as beautiful as she is?
Oh, yes. Oh, no. No. I'm saying we have many things as beautiful as she would want them to be.
Stay tuned for this juice. Pretty Woman hit theaters in 1990 and became an instant classic. It made $463 million worldwide on a $14 million budget. Julia Roberts earned her first Oscar nomination for the role. Richard Gere became one of Hollywood's top leading men. The film's success spawned countless imitators and cemented its place as one of the most beloved romantic comedies ever made. But what most people don't know is that the movie they fell in love with almost didn't exist. When Pretty Woman opened in theaters on March 23, 1990, nobody expected what was about to happen. The film was a gamble for Disney's Touchstone Pictures. Romantic comedies were struggling at the box office. The subject matter was risky, and the two leads, while talented, weren't guaranteed box office draws at that level yet. But within weeks, it became clear that something special was happening. The numbers tell part of the story. The film cost just $14 million to make, which was modest even by 1990 standards. It opened at #1 at the box office and stayed there for 4 consecutive weeks. By the end of its theatrical run, Pretty Woman had made $178 million domestically and $463 million worldwide. Those numbers made it the third highest-grossing film of 1990, behind only Home Alone and Ghost. For a romantic comedy with no special effects or action sequences, that was extraordinary. But the financial success was only part of what made Pretty Woman a phenomenon. The film created 2 massive stars overnight. Julia Roberts had appeared in a few films before, including Steel Magnolias, but Pretty Woman transformed her into a global superstar. Her performance earned her a Golden Globe win and her first Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. She became America's sweetheart practically overnight. Her smile became iconic. Her fashion in the film influenced trends worldwide. She went from a working actress to one of the biggest names in Hollywood, and it happened because of this one role. Richard Gere's career got a similar boost. He'd been working steadily in Hollywood for years with films like An Officer and a Gentleman and American Gigolo, but Pretty Woman elevated him to a new level. He became the definition of the romantic leading man. His chemistry with Roberts felt effortless and real. After Pretty Woman, he could command top dollar for romantic roles and became one of the most bankable stars of the 90s. The film's impact went beyond its stars. It revived the romantic comedy genre at a time when studios had mostly given up on it. Suddenly, every studio wanted their own Pretty Woman. The 90s became the golden age of romantic comedies, with films like Sleepless in Seattle, You've Got Mail, and Notting Hill, following the template that Pretty Woman established. The formula was simple. Take 2 attractive leads with great chemistry, put them in an unlikely situation, add humor and heart, and give audiences a happy ending. The movie became embedded in popular culture. Lines from the film became part of everyday conversation. The shopping scene where Vivian returns to the boutique that snubbed her became legendary. The opera scene introduced classical music to a new generation. The image of Richard Gere climbing the fire escape became one of cinema's most romantic moments. Even people who never saw the film knew these scenes. But here's what most audiences didn't know while they were falling in love with this fairy tale. The script that became Pretty Woman started as something completely different. It was darker, grittier, and told a story that would have left audiences shocked rather than charmed. The transformation from that original vision to the beloved classic is a story of Hollywood compromise, studio intervention, and the choice between truth and entertainment. Now, what were these darker scenes that even Hollywood was scared to portray? The forbidden scenes. One of the most shocking things about Pretty Woman is how different it was supposed to be. The movie we all know and love went through massive changes before it hit theaters. Scenes were filmed, shown to test audiences, and then cut completely because they were too dark, too real, too uncomfortable. These forbidden scenes tell the story of a very different film, one that Disney decided audiences weren't ready to see. The biggest change involved substance use. In J.F. Lawton's original script, Vivian's roommate Kit wasn't just a quirky sidekick. She had a serious substance addiction. The script showed this explicitly. Kit used harmful substances to cope with the harsh reality of life on the streets. And Vivian wasn't completely separated from that world either. While she wasn't as deep into it as Kit, the original script made it clear that she had used harmful substances before and was surrounded by that lifestyle constantly. Disney actually filmed scenes showing this reality. There were moments where Kit was high, where the harmful substances used was visible and undeniable. There were scenes showing Vivian's awareness of this problem and her own complicated relationship with substances. The filmmakers wanted to show the truth about what life was really like for people in Vivian's situation. They wanted audiences to understand that this wasn't glamorous or fun. It was survival, and survival sometimes meant making destructive choices. But when test audiences saw these scenes, they hated them. They couldn't connect with Vivian as a romantic lead when they saw her in those situations. They couldn't root for her love story with Edward when they were confronted with the harsh reality of her life. The fantasy fell apart. Disney looked at those test screening results and panicked. If audiences wouldn't accept the substance content, the entire movie was at risk. So those scenes were cut. All of them. Kit's addiction was softened into occasional mentions. Vivian became completely clean, innocent, just someone down on her luck rather than someone trapped in a dangerous world. Edward Lewis, the businessman played by Richard Gere, also went through major changes. In the original script, he wasn't a conflicted hero looking for connection. He was cold, calculating, and genuinely ruthless. His job as a corporate raider wasn't just mentioned in passing. The script showed what that actually meant. Edward bought struggling companies, broke them apart, sold off the pieces, and walked away with massive profits. He didn't care about the workers who lost their jobs or the communities that were destroyed. It was just business. One deleted scene showed Edward in a meeting where he casually discussed firing hundreds of employees. He calculated the cost savings, the profit margins, and signed off on layoffs without a second thought. Another scene showed him celebrating a successful deal while news reports in the background talked about the devastation his business moves had caused. The script wanted audiences to see that Edward's wealth came at a real human cost. He wasn't just rich. He got rich by crushing other people. Test audiences couldn't handle that version of Edward. They saw him as a villain, not a romantic lead. How were they supposed to root for Vivian falling in love with someone who destroyed lives for profit? The chemistry between the characters couldn't overcome the fact that Edward seemed fundamentally heartless. Disney realized they had a problem. If audiences hated Edward, the entire romance collapsed. So the scenes that made him look truly ruthless were cut. His corporate rating was kept in the story, but it was softened dramatically. The film added scenes where Edward questioned what he was doing, where he showed signs of conscience. His character arc became about a man who had lost touch with his humanity and found it again through love. That's a lot more palatable than a man who destroys companies and doesn't care. The final version of Edward is conflicted and capable of growth. The original version was just cruel. The ending went through the most dramatic transformation. In Lawton's original script, there was no fairy tale conclusion. The week ended exactly as it was supposed to. Edward paid Vivian the $3,000 they had agreed on. They said goodbye. And that was it. No last-minute declaration of love. No dramatic gesture. No happy ending. Just two people who had shared something brief and would now return to their separate lives. The original ending showed Vivian taking the money and leaving Los Angeles with Kit. They got on a bus heading out of the city. Vivian looked out the window as they drove away. The film ended with ambiguity. Maybe she'd use the money to start over somewhere else. Maybe things would get better. Or maybe they wouldn't. The script didn't promise anything. It just showed reality. Sometimes people meet, share something meaningful, and then move on. That's life. Disney actually filmed an ending close to this version. They shot Edward and Vivian saying goodbye. They filmed Vivian and Kit on a bus. Then they showed it to test audiences, and the response was overwhelmingly negative. People felt cheated. They had invested 2 hours in these characters. Them to end up together. They wanted the fairy tale. When the credits rolled without a happy ending, audiences were angry and disappointed. Disney looked at those reactions and made a business decision. They couldn't release a romantic comedy where the couple doesn't end up together. That's not what audiences paid to see, so they went back and reshot the entire ending. They created the now iconic fire escape scene where Edward overcomes his fear of heights to climb up and rescue Vivian. She leans out, they kiss, and the movie ends with the strong implication that they'll be together. It's pure Hollywood magic, the exact opposite of Lawton's realistic conclusion. But beyond all these, the original story held more darker scenes. The original script also included much more about Vivian's backstory. There were scenes showing where she came from and how she ended up on the streets. Her past involved family trauma, abuse, and circumstances that gave her very few options. These scenes explained why a smart, capable person would end up in such a dangerous situation. They provided context and depth. They made Vivian a fully realized character with a history that shaped who she became. But these backstory scenes made the movie heavier. They forced audiences to confront uncomfortable questions about poverty, family dysfunction, and limited opportunities. Test audiences found them depressing. They didn't want to think about those issues. They wanted to enjoy a romance. So Disney cut most of Vivian's backstory. A few brief mentions remained, but the detailed exploration of her past was gone. She became more of a blank slate, someone audiences could project onto without being weighed down by difficult realities. All of these changes served the same purpose. They transformed a gritty drama about exploitation and inequality into a feel-good romantic comedy. Disney removed everything that made audiences uncomfortable and replaced it with charm, humor, and fantasy. The forbidden scenes that were cut represent the film's original soul, the story J.F. Lawton wanted to tell about real people in difficult circumstances making complicated choices. Those scenes have never been officially released. Disney keeps them locked away, probably because releasing them would complicate the film's legacy. Pretty Woman is remembered as a beloved romantic comedy. Showing audiences the much darker version that almost existed might change how people feel about it. The deleted footage sits in a vault somewhere, a reminder that Hollywood often chooses comfort over truth. People who worked on the film have occasionally mentioned the cut material over the years. They've described how different the tone was when filming those darker scenes. Julia Roberts and Richard Gere apparently gave powerful performances in moments that audiences never got to see. The energy on set shifted, depending on whether they were filming the light romantic content or the heavier dramatic material that would eventually be removed. The forbidden scenes matter because they show us the road not taken. They reveal the film that could have been, one that challenged audiences instead of comforting them. J.F. Lawton wrote a script that tried to say something meaningful about wealth, power, and survival in America. Disney turned it into a Cinderella story. Both versions have their place, but only one made it to theaters. The darker, more honest version exists only in deleted scenes that most people will never see. But despite how polished the light version was, it still wasn't free from criticism. The backlash and what everyone had to say. The moment Pretty Woman hit theaters in 1990, controversy followed. Advocacy groups immediately spoke out against the film. They argued that Disney had taken a serious issue and turned it into entertainment. Organizations that worked with vulnerable populations were especially vocal. They said the movie glamorized a reality that was actually filled with danger, exploitation, and trauma. Real life on the streets wasn't anything like what the film portrayed. There was violence, coercion, and very little chance of a happy ending. Critics pointed out specific problems with how the story was told. The movie showed Vivian as independent and in control of her choices. She picked her clients. She set her boundaries. She walked away when she wanted to. But that's not how things actually work for most people in her situation. The film ignored pimps, substance addiction, violence, and the lack of real options that trap people in dangerous circumstances. By leaving all of that out, Disney created a fantasy that had almost nothing to do with reality. The power imbalance in the relationship bothered a lot of critics too. Edward had all the money, all the control, all the power. Vivian was financially desperate and completely dependent on his generosity. That's not romance. That's an unequal relationship where one person holds all the cards. The movie never really addressed this. Instead, it presented their week together as a mutual choice between equals, which it clearly wasn't. Edward could walk away at any moment with no consequences. Vivian's entire future depended on how he decided to treat her. Some critics were particularly harsh about the film's message. The stories seemed to say that if you're struggling, what you need is a wealthy man to rescue you. Your problems aren't systemic or complicated. They're just a lack of money and opportunity that the right rich person can fix. That message bothered people who understood that poverty, trauma, and limited options don't get solved by meeting someone with a credit card. The film turned serious social issues into a romantic plot device. The criticism got louder over the years rather than quieter. As society became more aware of exploitation and power dynamics, Pretty Woman aged poorly in some people's eyes. What seemed like harmless entertainment in 1990 looked more problematic decades later. The film had taken J.F. Lawton's script, which tried to say something honest about inequality and survival, and stripped away everything meaningful to create a Cinderella story. Critics argued that was dishonest and potentially harmful because it shaped how millions of people thought about serious issues. But then, if the movie had this much critics, how then was it able to travel so far? The film had plenty of defenders. They argued that Pretty Woman was never supposed to be a documentary or a social commentary. It was a fairy tale, plain and simple. Audiences understood they were watching fantasy. Nobody walked out of the theater thinking the movie showed realistic circumstances. People knew it was escapism, and that was the point. Sometimes audiences want to forget about real-world problems for 2 hours and just enjoy a romance. Defenders also pointed out that the movie made millions of people happy. It became a cultural phenomenon because it connected with audiences emotionally. The chemistry between Julia Roberts and Richard Gere felt real, even if the circumstances didn't. The film gave people hope and joy. That has value. Not every movie needs to be dark and challenging. Sometimes entertainment is enough. Julia Roberts addressed the controversy multiple times over the years. She acknowledged that the original script was much darker and that significant changes were made to appeal to mainstream audiences. She understood why some people criticized the final product, but she also stood by the film. In interviews, she talked about how Pretty Woman resonated with millions of viewers worldwide and brought them genuine happiness. For Roberts, that mattered more than whether the film perfectly addressed every social issue it touched on. She also pointed out that she was young when she made the movie and focused on playing the character as written. The bigger decisions about tone and message were made by the director and studio. Roberts gave a performance that people connected with, and she was proud of that, even if the film itself remained controversial. Even the crew members had a day in the matter. Gary Marshall, who directed the movie, never apologized for the changes he made. He was completely open about transforming the script from a dark drama into a romantic comedy. In interviews throughout his career, especially in the years before his death in 2016, Marshall explained his philosophy. He believed movies should make people happy. He thought audiences went to theaters to escape their problems, not to be confronted with harsh realities they already knew about. Marshall said he deliberately changed the tone because he wanted to create something uplifting. He knew some people would criticize that choice, but he was fine with it. His goal was entertainment, and by that measure, he succeeded completely. Pretty Woman became one of the most successful romantic comedies ever made. Marshall understood that some critics would never forgive him for sanitizing J.F. Lawton's original story, but he believed he made the right choice for what audiences wanted. J.F. Lawton had the most complicated relationship with the film's success. On one hand, Pretty Woman made him financially secure and opened doors for his screenwriting career. The movie's massive success meant he could work in Hollywood for years afterward. On the other hand, the film that made all that possible wasn't really his story anymore. His dark, socially conscious drama about exploitation and inequality had been transformed into something he barely recognized. In interviews, Lawton expressed mixed feelings. He respected what Gary Marshall accomplished. He understood why Disney made the changes they did. But he also acknowledged that the final film wasn't the story he set out to tell. He saw Pretty Woman as a completely different project that happened to use his framework and character names. His original script, 3000, was still the story he believed in, even if audiences never got to see it. Lawton was particularly frank about how Hollywood works. Studios buy scripts and then change them to fit what they think will make money. That's the business. Writers can fight against it or accept it, but they rarely have final say. Lawton accepted it because he had to, but he never pretended the final film represented his original vision. Richard Gere talked about the movie far less than his co-stars. He rarely discussed the darker elements that were cut or the controversy around the film's message. Most of his comments focused on the final product and his working relationship with Julia Roberts. Their chemistry was undeniable, and that became his talking point. In a few interviews, though, Gere mentioned that he appreciated the complexity that remained in Edward's character. Even in the softened version, Edward was a man capable of coldness who chose connection instead. That journey interested Gere more than debates about whether the film should have stayed dark. He played the character he was given and left the bigger questions about the film's message to others. The deleted material from the original Pretty Woman concept hasn't been entirely hidden. Although Disney never released a full set of the darker deleted scenes, several pieces of the original storyline, including alternate endings, script pages, and behind-the-scenes explanations, have appeared over the years in DVD and Blu-ray bonus features, cast interviews, and anniversary releases. These extras give fans a glimpse into the film's earlier, grittier version without overshadowing its final romantic comedy tone. Rather than protecting the movie's legacy by locking footage away, the studio has gradually shared parts of the darker original vision while still preserving the uplifting feel the finished film is known for. Crew members who worked on the production have occasionally mentioned the cut material over the years. In interviews and behind-the-scenes features, some described the atmosphere on set when filming darker scenes. The energy was completely different compared to when they filmed the lighter romantic moments. Everyone knew they were dealing with heavy material that might not make the final cut. Some crew members said the deleted footage was genuinely powerful. Julia Roberts and Richard Gere gave performances in those scenes that showed their range as actors. The material was unsettling and uncomfortable, which was the point. It showed real talent in portraying difficult, complex situations. But that footage remains unseen by audiences, hidden away because it didn't fit the movie Disney wanted to sell. The controversy around Pretty Woman hasn't disappeared. If anything, it's gotten more intense as time passes, and society's awareness of these issues has grown. The film remains beloved by millions, while also being criticized as problematic by many others. Both sides have valid points, and the debate continues more than 30 years after the movie's release. The legacy and debate. 35 years later, Pretty Woman remains a cultural touchstone. It's quoted constantly. The shopping scene, the opera scene, the fire escape ending, and every other endearing scene are moments that are embedded in popular culture. But the conversation around the film has evolved. Modern audiences watch it with different eyes, more aware of the problematic elements that were either downplayed or removed entirely. Some argue that the film should be appreciated in the context of when it was made. Standards were different in 1990. Audiences expected different things from romantic comedies. Judging it by today's standards isn't entirely fair. The film delivered exactly what audiences wanted at the time, and it did so brilliantly. Others contend that the issues with Pretty Woman were evident even in 1990, and criticism at the time was dismissed because the film made so much money. They argue that Hollywood has always prioritized profit over responsibility, and this film is a perfect example. The studio took a script that tried to say something meaningful about society and turned it into a fairy tale because fairy tales sell better. The film's legacy shows up in unexpected places. It influenced fashion in ways that lasted for years. The polka dot dress Vivian wore to the polo match became instantly iconic. Women wanted to dress like Julia Roberts in the movie. The red gown from the opera scene is still referenced in fashion magazines. The transformation montage, where Vivian gets a complete makeover, became a template that countless other films and TV shows copied. The idea that the right clothes and the right look could change your life became a recurring theme in entertainment. Pretty Woman also changed how Hollywood thought about casting. The chemistry between Roberts and Gere wasn't manufactured. It was real, and audiences felt it. After this film, studios became obsessed with finding that same magic between leads. Chemistry tests became standard practice. The success of Pretty Woman proved that audiences would show up for a romance if the connection between the stars felt genuine, even if the story itself stretched believability. The movie created a blueprint for the modern romantic comedy that's still being followed today. The structure became a formula. Two people from different worlds meet, overcome obstacles, learn from each other, and end up together. Almost every successful romantic comedy since then has used some version of this template. Films like The Proposal, Crazy Rich Asians, and countless others owe a debt to what Pretty Woman established. Streaming services have given the film new life, with younger generations discovering it for the first time. But those younger viewers often have very different reactions than audiences in 1990. They see the age gap between the characters and question it. They notice the power dynamics and feel uncomfortable. They wonder why Vivian needed rescuing at all, instead of finding her own way. The film sparks debates on social media about whether it's still acceptable to enjoy something that feels outdated in its values. There's also been a strange phenomenon where Pretty Woman gets referenced constantly in pop culture, but often with a knowing wink. TV shows and other movies will recreate iconic scenes, but with an edge of irony. They're acknowledging that the film is problematic, while also recognizing its cultural significance. It's become possible to love the movie while also admitting it hasn't aged perfectly. The Broadway musical adaptation that opened in 2018 tried to update the story for modern sensibilities. They tweaked certain elements, gave Vivian more agency, and tried to address some of the criticisms. But even that version couldn't escape the fundamental issues baked into the story. You can only modernize a fairy tale so much before it stops being the fairy tale people remember. The forbidden scenes that were cut represent the road not taken. They show us the film that J.F. Lawton originally envisioned, the one that would have made audiences uncomfortable, but might have sparked important conversations. Instead, we got a movie that made us feel good, that gave us a happy ending, that let us believe in fairy tales for 2 hours. Both versions have value. The dark version would have been important and challenging. The light version brought joy to millions and launched careers. The question is whether Hollywood made the right choice in transforming one into the other, or whether audiences deserve to see the harder truth that Lawton originally wrote. That question doesn't have an easy answer, and perhaps that's exactly why Pretty Woman continues to fascinate us decades later. It represents both what we love about Hollywood magic and what troubles us about how that magic gets made. What are your thoughts on the transformation of Pretty Woman, from dark drama to romantic fairy tale? Would you have wanted to see the original version? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. We'll see you in the next video.